and welcome everyone to our next episode of Big Data Talks, in which we have conversations with industry experts about the way in which data, machine learning, and artificial intelligence are changing the way we live. My name is Jan Willem Milberg, and I will be your host today. I'm the author of the Enterprise Big Data Framework, which is hosting this series of Big Data Talks. You can always watch back the recording of the discussion on YouTube, the Big Data Framework website, and the podcasting platform on Apple Podcasts. Today, it is my great pleasure to welcome back Susanna Hicks, a guest speaker at this year's Big Data Days 2023 virtual conference. I had a long discussion with Susanna during the conference, and I thought the topics that she shared were so interesting that it's really good to do a separate episode around that. Susanna is a data strategist and scientist at the International Association of Privacy Professionals, better known as IAPP. Susanna is also an adjunct professor at Southern New Hampshire University and a Master in Data Science Analytics program. Susanna has worked in data strategy, analytics, and data science for more than 2 decades and has worked in multiple industries, including education, healthcare, consultancy, market intelligence, and many, many more. Susanna has a bachelor's degree in history from Bree College, a master in science in analytics and data science from the University of New Hampshire, and is currently pursuing her PhD in business administration and organizational development from Johnson & Wales University. You can see why this would be my next guest on Big Data Talks. There's 100 of questions that I would like to ask you. Welcome, Susanna. It's really a great pleasure to have you with us here today.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm always happy to talk about data or honestly anything, but I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
That's something that we share. We could probably fill this episode for many, many hours, but
Indeed.
I'm truly grateful that you decided to join today. So while I was preparing for this next episode, I started to read your history and bio, and I saw that you have a degree in history. So I always wonder what makes people take that journey to go into data, especially if they come from a completely different background.
Right. I do. I have a bachelor's degree in history, and when I went to college, I thought I had my life planned out, as some young people do, right? And so I went to Berea College, which is a small liberal arts college in central Kentucky, and I received a very, very good liberal arts education, which I still think has great value. Teaches us how to think critically, if nothing else. And my degree was in history, which I chose because I am an avid history student. I've always loved the stories within history. Fact is greater than fiction. I still share that love. When I'm not reading professionally, I'm typically reading something, either historical fiction or nonfiction history. So that has not gone away. But I've just generally always been interested in facts and statistics, and more importantly, stories. As you mentioned, I've worked in a variety of, my path is it's not been linear. I've kind of gone in a million different directions before I landed, specifically in data. One of the things that I did is I owned my own business for a while. And as a business owner, I relied extremely heavily on data in order to help make my business successful. So I was using data and using data analysis without really understanding that that's what I was doing. I just knew that this is where I could understand my business better. So that led into data, but it all started from me wanting to understand the world, and my interest in stories and facts and figures. And to me, it's all related. I know that it's all related.
It's absolutely related. I was reading a book the other day around the origin of data science, and especially on how that we came to where we are today, especially when it comes towards big data and the way that data-driven decision-making is going. And I read this story around in ancient Egypt, where they started to collect all of the written books in the Library of Alexandria. You probably know more about that than I do.
I'm still sad about that, by the way.
Yeah. And it was kind of like or at least what was known as a first attempt to collect data from all different places on the planet in one central database, if you want to call it.
Sure.
And obviously it's all different nowadays with digital databases, etc. But there are so many lessons, I think, that we can learn from that way of thinking that still apply towards the digital systems that we see today.
Yeah, I agree.
If you look at all your kind of historical knowledge, do you see a lot of parallels to what's happening in the world today?
I do, and I kind of, if we want to get philosophical for just a moment,
I always love to.
Okay, so you take the concept. It was the Greeks and the Romans that kind of gave us the sense of is history linear, which means that it's on a line, and if it's linear, there's an understanding that we can change, right? You're on a path, and that means that as humans, we can change. But then there's this other idea that history is cyclical, right? I combine the two in my mind as there's a line that we're traveling on, but there's also a ball, right? That's rolling along the line with us. So you have a combination of both. So yes, I see that we are still doing those things. We're just doing them differently. It's like statistics, right? When statistics came about as a scholarly area of study, even my dad, who has a business degree, and he got his business, he was in college in the 60s. His finals in statistics was to do one regression problem by hand. That was his final.
Wow.
Because our brains do not have the power to do all of those statistical computations that now we can do it with the click of a button. The technology caught up with statistics, which to me, it was that joining that was the birth of big data and machine learning and AI as we know it. The principles were already there. But the technology has allowed us to take it as far as, I don't know how far we're going to take it. I mean, it's still happening.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things that always fascinates me on how fast we have been traveling, especially if we look at the last decade and 15 years. All of that technology has enabled us to do all those things that needed to be done manually not so very long ago.
I can't imagine doing it manually. I really can't.
It
sounds extremely. I don't think I'd be a data scientist if I had to do all those computations manually. So
absolutely, it's going to take hours and hours of very concentrated work.
Yes.
So I'm always interested to learn. You explained a little bit around your I would say history, if I can call that way. Is there like a specific moment that you say, well, this is when I'm going to pursue a career in data?
So I bounced around for a bit, which it took me a while to figure out what I wanted to be when I grow up. If you want to like put a little American Western topic or phrase on it. But one of the things that I did is I worked in the restaurant business for a long time, off and on, and that's where I owned my own business. And I was doing that. And I don't know how much you know about or if you've worked in the industry, but it is grueling. The hours are very difficult. The work is much more physical than people realize it. And no matter what kind of business you own, if you are a small business owner, you are working 24/7. I reached the point where we were successful. We were great. Actually, our restaurant was purchased by the parent company, which was great. So we made a little money. But it was around that time that I realized I was like, I've kind of done what I can do here. Plus, I needed a change. I wanted to do something else. And I considered an MBA. But I really didn't feel like that was going to propel me to the next level. Not for nothing, but there's a lot of MBAs out there, right?
Absolutely. I made the exact same choice that you made a few years ago.
Right. So I chose data instead because I recognized that what I had been across, what was one common theme across my entire career in education, well, it was the use of data, whether we call it facts or statistics or whatever, it's all data, information. And I happened to be in New Hampshire at the time, and they had just launched a few years ago a new area of their graduate program, which was a Master of Science in Analytics and Data Science. And so I talked to them, and it just felt right. And so I jumped in, and that program was a completely immersive program. It was an accelerated program, but it was 11 months, but it was 9 to 5. It was not geared towards working and doing this program. So I took a leap of faith that this was going to work out. I quit my job. I had a good spouse who was in my corner cheering me all the way and was willing to do what needed to be done for me to have these 11 months to make this shift. And it was the right decision, and I don't regret it. And my professional career hasn't been the same since. So it was, it was really wonderful.
Great. Yeah, that's really a great story on how you can basically completely go in a different direction.
Yep.
Before I ask you some questions around, studying and getting all involved in data, one thing that really got my attention is you mentioned the restaurant business. And I'm always wondering to what extent are data-driven decisions taken in the restaurant business? Were you already at that stage, looking at your menu and supplies or profit margins from a
we were,
or is it
we got to that point, but we opened in a new market where this particular brand, et cetera, did not exist. So the first restaurant business, when you're ordering projections, it's all based around making what are your sales projections so that you can then plan for inventory. And if your projections are wrong, there's the chance that if you are wrong, even just a little bit, you will either not be able to meet the needs of what your business has inventory wise, meaning you won't have enough inventory, or you will order too much, which will then turn into waste. So projections are very, very important. But the first year you're open, you're guessing. You don't know. But by the time I got to that stage, I had been in the restaurant business for a long time. So luckily my guesses for that first year were not that off. I will toot my own horn a little bit. I was good at my job. I was good.
Within a particular margin, you were able to kind of...
I was able to do that. But once we got a year's worth of data, and restaurants operate on it's a seasonality. So if we want to get really technical and data sciencey, we're talking about time series, right? But absolutely. I was doing time series analysis in my head without doing the modeling is what I was doing. And the places that we specifically use data to make decisions have to do with inventory management, staffing, budgetary planning, etc., and marketing. All of those things require data, especially historic data once you get a year's worth, because you're always looking at what sales on this day did we do last year as a guide to what we might do today. Yeah. And we did that on a weekly basis.
A predictive nature, you think?
There is. Yeah. There is, absolutely. But I wasn't using modeling, again, to do my predictions. I was using my experience and the data that I had. I was not doing data science in a formal way, but I was doing predictive, data analysis based upon my experience as a restaurant operator and the data that I had on hand for the previous years in our particular area, as well as what was going on in my community. So those are all the variables that I would have to pull in to predict what our sales were going to be for next week. And if I was wrong, there was a great deal at stake because we were a very small operation. If I got it wrong, even one day could ruin a month. Right? Yeah. It was tough.
It's very, very interesting. So then you make the jump towards data science. You sign up for this degree, and let me tell you a little bit about my background because I think it's very similar. I started out in engineering, got a master's degree in that, and then I thought after a few years, well, I'm either going to go for an MBA or I'm going to go completely deep dive. So I enrolled at the University of Pennsylvania in a computer science degree. And I remember that I started with my first lectures, and first lectures, obviously programming. And I thought after 2 weeks, oh my goodness, what did I get myself into?
I did the exact same thing as soon as they introduced me to R and Python, because I am not a coder. I came to this late. I was like, what have I done? Yeah, what have I done?
So I think it's a very similar experience. So for a while I struggled, and I was thinking, is this what I want? Because this is so completely difficult and different from anything that I've done. But I kind of pulled through, and I said, well, if I really, at the end of the fall, I'm unable to make this, or I flunk out, then I'll just leave it. But I put in the hours day and night, and then ultimately I kind of managed to turn around. I can fairly say that I'm a pretty decent coder right now. How did you tackle that? How did you go about that?
It was hard at the beginning. It was really, really hard. I had dabbled in I dabbled in computer technology industry for a little bit, believe it or not. So the college that I went to was a work study school, and my labor position was in the computer center. We happened to be an Apple campus. So in addition to graduating with my history degree, I also graduated as a certified Apple technician. So I fixed them. So there was a period of time that I was the person that you called from the help desk and says, my computer is blown up. This must be fixed today. And I was the person that would fix your computer or your printer or whatever it was. And then I got away from that. So computer science and working with those developers and coders was not unusual. I was already able to speak that language, so to speak, and translating is a big part of what we do between technology and non-technology folks. So that wasn't a problem, but coding, I still struggle with coding. I really do. I am not a coder at heart, and I've kind of gone in the management track because that's just where I'm suited, but you still have to know enough to be able to know what you're talking about. And where I have ended up is I'm more of an R person than Python. That's just the way it happened. For whatever reason, R was easier than Python. I can read Python. I can struggle through it. If I needed to do it, I could do it. It will take me longer than it will take most people. Same with R. However, what I learned in that program was I understood not so much the coding, but the modeling and when it was appropriate to use one model over another, right? And this goes back to statistics and when one thing is appropriate and another, and what is the context and the right context, etc. To me, that's what I took away that was so very, very important. Yes, I learned the technical skills to muddle through, but I use other tools now that don't.
But I think what you're referencing is a very fundamental point, because I also meet a lot of people that in interviews and in various events that are good programmers, but they don't fundamentally understand the models or the concepts behind it, or they cannot argue why when one algorithm works better than another.
That's
because they know how to use and install a package, and it's all pre-programmed nowadays.
But that's coding. That's not data science.
Yeah, correct. And they don't understand the math and the parameters that you need to set and how it exactly works.
That's right.
So for everyone who's listening today, and I think you just referenced it's coding, it's not data science. What's the fundamental difference in your opinion?
That's a very interesting question. Data science is science, but there's also, I think, an art to it.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And knowing when it's knowing when to apply one model or algorithm compared to another. And I believe personally that one should use the simplest tool or model available that will solve for what you're trying to solve. You don't always need a rocket ship, right? And there are some people that just want to go straight to neural nets because you're going to get great accuracies. Well, a lot of times, certainly in just everyday business, you do not need a neural net. You need just basic regressions or random forest or clustering or something along those lines. But even within there, there's so many models that one can choose from. When do you choose one over the other, right? And that to me is the art of, that's the art of data science, of knowing when to do those things. Now, doing the coding, you can choose to do it in R, or you can do what I do, which I use JMP. You know, instead of SPS, I prefer JMP. It's quite powerful, and all the modeling that I would want to do is available to me in JMP, and I just skip the coding piece because that's I don't enjoy it.
The coding is just the tool.
It's a tool. It's just a tool. Yeah, and I'm not married to any tool, right? You can do it all. You can do it all by code, or you can find something that will do the code, but that does not help you choose which model, nor how to interpret the model results when you get them. And that's where we get into the art, I think.
I would like to go a little bit deeper into that reference towards an art, because I think that's a very powerful statement, and also I think something that's very true and maybe sometimes a little bit underestimated. And you mentioned all of these algorithms, random forest, the classification, clustering, all the I would say standard textbook parts. And what I found, or at least from my experience, is that as soon as you get into an upper management discussion, a boardroom, people who don't have necessarily data science or even a statistical backgrounds, it's very difficult for people to understand what you're saying. Because they are unable to differentiate between a random forest or a decision tree. They don't even know the difference.
Right.
So it kind of brings me to my next question. How do you ensure effective communication? How do you make that this art can be practiced?
Well, in that audience, if that's your audience, I think it's very important to understand, not only do they not know those things, but they don't need to know those things. And honestly, they don't care. What they are interested in is, what's the business problem and what solution are you bringing us? And the sausage making all between in there, that's not for them. That's for us, right? You and I can sit around and talk about the fact that I use latent class analysis versus typical k-means. They do not care, nor should they.
Not correct.
Right? So what do? You have to be able to tell the story, which is setting up the business problem. And to me, that's where the art starts, because that's communication. A business user, say, comes to me and they say, I want to understand why this person bought this instead of this. But what they're really trying to understand is, who are our customers, right? Who are the customers? So to me, that I start talking to them and I understand, and what they're actually trying to understand is, who is our customer base, which to me turns into a customer segmentation project. They think they want one thing, but you need to have a conversation to understand what it is that they're really trying. So for me, that's the beginning of the art. And then you look at your data, etc. You see what's available to you. I personally think data cleaning is actually exploratory data analysis. I don't mind cleaning it, because to me, that's how I learn the data. So you're in there, you're doing your stuff. And along the way, one of my favorite steps is, after you get to know your data and you're looking at it and you're looking at the problem and you're thinking to yourself, do I have all the variables that I need, right? Or do I have too many? And you start throwing some out. A lot of times I find that we need to do feature engineering. We need to create new variables. And that to me is art. Knowing what you might need to help answer this problem, and you're creating these new, variables to help answer that problem based upon things that are available. And using this customer segmentation problem was real. This is something that I did. And I ended up, I don't know how many I created, but the data set became much more rich after we did our feature engineering. We dropped a lot because the model told us to drop a lot, but that's the science part, right? Yeah. And then when it came to delivering this presentation, which what we discovered is that there was not just one customer, that what we discovered is our business have 7 distinct types of customers. And what the business person wants to know is, who are these people, right? So that's the storytelling, right? So that's, again, the art and the storytelling and the communication. And you start building these pictures of who are these personas, because in marketing, they love to talk about personas. Well, that's who these are. And it's the art of communication at this point, and delivering that story so that they understand it. They don't care how we got there. They just want to know, what is the story? And then you've got to get to, why should it matter to them? Which brings us to our recommendations, right? As part of our plan. And you have to use relatable examples to show them that, look, you can use this in this way or this way or this way. And it is an art, and it takes experience to figure out how to do that. That is something that I have developed over time. I did not graduate with my brandly new minted master's degree, paper in hand, and be able to have this conversation I'm having with you now, right?
Absolutely not.
It's taken time, and it's taken failure in delivering the message, or understanding the business problem, thinking they want one thing, and I go off and I do something and it's completely not what they wanted at all. I have more cases of that than I do success, but you learn through experience. And I
think that experience is very important, because, as you mentioned, you cannot learn how do you do this from a book or a class, or
not at all,
even a very good tutorial.
No.
Many of those people that I spoke to in previous episodes said, well, after a while, you build up a certain routine. So you kind of know which questions to ask, where there are frequent problems within the data. Do you recognize that? Do you have something similar?
Yes. I think that you can be hobbled by that, though. I see what they're saying. However, if you stick to your standard routine, I think you're closing a small door of opportunity that something new might be introduced. So I think like, I've been at my position now almost 5 years. I know our data sets very, very well, but I'm constantly still discovering something new, or a new application or whatever. That's because I don't want to submit, okay, I know this stuff. I don't think you cannot say that you know a data set, because it can be used in multiple scenarios. If you're using a data set that you know very well and you've used it for other things, but suddenly a new business problem pops up, and by the way, I think data science is a team sport. You should do it collaboratively. Someone that you bring in, maybe even an intern. I had 2 great interns last year that were just phenomenal, and they saw things that I hadn't thought of because I had been in the data set too long.
And it's very good to have different perspectives.
Absolutely. And that's the opportunity for newness.
Absolutely. So, there's so much new insights.
Right. Routine is good, and having a typical way of how you do things, I do think that is good. It saves time in the long run if you kind of say, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. But you must be open to new thoughts, new ideas, and new opportunities to use something that you consider old in new ways.
Well, I think that's probably one of the great lessons right away from this episode. So Susanna, one of the reasons that I wanted to invite you today for a little bit more of a deep dive discussion, because most of the people who listen to us really want to go a little bit deeper, is that during our conference, you shared, in my opinion, some really amazing insights from your PhD research and all the work that you've been doing in that. For everyone who's listening and is completely new to the field, could you explain a little bit on what your PhD is about,
Sure.
What you've been researching?
Yes.
And then we'll dive a little bit deeper into that.
So my topic is about organizational data culture. So technically it's an organizational development PhD and topic, but it's about organizational data culture and the challenges and benefits that one would face of having one and of not having one, and how can we hopefully through my research I find ways to make recommendations to help organizations really embrace an organizational data culture. There are several studies that have been done, some very, very strong data that I list in at the very beginning of my dissertation that states that business people are reporting at like 91%. I can't remember the exact statistic, but it's in the low 90s. That 91% of the reason that data initiatives fail is the lack of a data culture. You can have the most, you can do a data maturity assessment and be off the charts. You could be great. You're doing really, high level modeling and great. And you've got data architects and data engineers and analysts and data scientists, and you have all these things. And maybe you even have data literacy too, but it's all still combined in one little team, right? It's not across the organization. You have not achieved a data culture across the organization, because from my perspective, data is not meant to be done just by technology or just by data or one or two people maybe on the product teams. It's got to go across the entire organization. And that's what I'm studying. I'm specifically looking at how data maturity, how where you are on a data maturity level impacts or correlates to your decision-making processes. That's my actual research, looking for those correlations and seeing how, go ahead.
Yeah, and you can already kind of expect my next question is, what did you find so far? So what are there components?
It's early. It is early days, and what I'm seeing does jive with the literacy or the literature that's already out there, which is organizations understand they need to get here, but they have no idea how to do it. They don't know how to do it. And changing organizational culture of any type is extremely difficult, right? It's not easy to do. And it's even harder to do if you are, if your CEO, your president, et cetera, is also the founder of your company, right? CEOs, visionary CEOs typically lead with their instinct. That's why who they are. I mean, Steve Jobs, for instance, I'm sure he was using data, but it was his gut that said, no, we've got to go create this thing that people don't even know that they need yet. That's not all database. So, and that's what's worked for them. So bringing them along to data-driven decision-making is difficult, and getting that to cross all organizational lines is hard, but it's not impossible. One thing that I have found, a couple little insights that I've found so far, is that without buy-in and commitment towards this goal at the senior most levels of leadership, it will be extremely difficult to do.
I can imagine that.
Also,
yeah, go ahead. I'm a newly appointed CEO, not a founder. I come in, let's say, first week on the job, and I make a similar assessment that you just referenced, saying, I want to move towards a more data-driven culture. Where do I start?
Well, the first place I would start is, let's understand where we are now, right? Let's do it, which is a data maturity assessment. They're done all the time. Let's understand what our data environment is today. And then this leads us into the whole data strategy question. Let's align our business. What is the business strategy? And then let's figure out what our data strategy is, making sure that those align because one supports the other. And then once we have an understanding of where we are today, then we have the conversation with you, our newly appointed CEO, and your team that surround you, your peers, and have a discussion about where we want to go. Okay. So it's a journey. We're here today, right? But we want to get to this point over here. And the data strategy then for me is I go away and I'm like, okay, I understand this now. And I start to put together a draft of a data strategy, and the roadmap that will get us to where we want to go. That's how I would start.
Yeah. So what would be, because you're referencing, I think, a crucial part that many organizations forget about, and that is data strategy. We always talk about business strategy, data strategy is something new. You don't hear it a lot, not even in large data organizations.
Right.
So what should be key components that should be part of the data strategy, and how ultimately is that going to help companies to get a competitive advantage?
Well, like I said, it's the first thing is that it must align and underpin the organizational business strategy. And honestly, there are organizations that don't have that either, right? So let's just be honest, they do exist. And certainly, when I came into my organization, we didn't have a data strategy. So I had to start from scratch. And I needed to learn the business. I had to spend some time learning the business and then sit down and write the first draft of our data strategy, which does change. Every 2 or 3 years, you should dust it off and recheck it and make sure that it's still good. And then I tried to figure out where we were. And we were, in terms of data maturity, we were a 0. We had a lot of work to do. But the key components for me have to do, depending on where you are on that scale, there is some data management that has to come into place. You've got to talk to your dev team and your technology team, figure out what resources you have. Do you even have the right resources? So you may have to have a resourcing question. Mm-hmm. But the key components of a good data strategy for me are that alignment, understanding where we are, creating short-term data management, a short-term data management roadmap to help us move us in that direction. And as part of that is a strong data governance practices and standards to make sure that when we do get to where we're going, our data is such that it is usable. Without data governance, your data could end up being useless. And that's the last thing we want.
Excellent. And then ultimately, because you're referencing or making a roadmap or moving from point A to point B, do you put metrics in place to measure that roadmap?
Yeah, you can. Depends on how deep you want to go. There's lots of data management or data maturity assessments. There are some that are extremely deep, and you're measuring every single little thing all the way down to, do you have a metadata dictionary, et cetera. A lot of organizations are not going to want to go that deep. So you need to pull it up. Again,
is there a good assessment you would recommend, or a particular approach that you are a big fan of?
Yeah, what I've done, honestly, is I've taken the Book of Knowledge from the Data Management Association, which has a new name. I think they were just incorporated with IEEE. I took it, and it was very deep. It was very detailed, and I kind of tailored it to our organization. So it's kind of a hybrid. The one that we use is a hybrid that's it's not that deep. It's deep enough, but it's not just 1, 2, 3, 4 high level. There's a little bit in there. And what I did first was I mapped out a short term, like 18, what are we going to do for the next 18 months, which was about the data environment and resourcing. And this is where we want to get to, which ultimately my first goal was, let's just get to the ability to do predictive analytics. We're not predictive. I meant diagnostic, excuse me. So that people start asking why. And the biggest problem we had was that people did not trust our data. So the big challenge I had at the beginning was to get our data into a place via data governance policies and strategies and remediation that people could trust the data. If they don't trust the data, they're not going to embrace it. And you will never reach to the point where data is seen as an asset, let alone an organizational data culture.
Sure. Yeah. So in order for people to trust data, so do you let them validate it, or do you set a particular truth index?
Yeah, I do. I work when we work with data sets to get them to be validated to the point that we are ready, that the data team is ready to put our stamp of approval. You can trust this one. We work directly with the product team that data belongs to, and I work with a brilliant data architect, and the patterns that we have chosen to use is domain-driven architecture. So we're looking at data domains. So within my world, we're a membership association. So we have a membership domain, we have a certification domain, we have a training domain, and we look at the data that way. And within each of those, we sit down with the data set. And this is myself, the data engineer, the data architect, maybe another analyst. And then we bring the folks in from that domain, because they know the data because they created it. They also know what they need it to do for them. And we have to do it together. Again, data science is a team sport. You need the actual business people in the room with you. You cannot do this in a silo off by yourself. And ultimately, it's for them to validate, not us. They tell us when it's wrong, and we go and we can do whatever, and we create, maybe new queries, whatever, and we bring it back, and then we validate it together, and they're the ones that say, it's ready, it's good. It's ready. And sometimes, I'll add just one more thing. Sometimes, and this happened, you find a data set that no matter how hard you try, it is so dirty or inconsistent that it's not worth releasing to the organization because you can't validate it.
Okay. So you're basically already touching upon my next question, because ultimately you want to make sure that data, hopefully validated and very truthful data, trusted data, is released to the organization. Do you use some kind of a data catalog or some way that people can kind of browse through data sets in your organization to say, I need this for this particular problem?
We have not. Yeah, I see where you're going, and that is a place that we want to go to. On our roadmap, we have not reached that level. We are at the level where they come to us and say, I need something, and then the data team will provide it. We are not at the level where that the data is directly accessible by the business users. We have not reached true data democratization. We're not there yet. We're somewhere in the middle. We have our data now, structured and unstructured data. We have it organized. We've got it set up in our environment the way we want it, so that the stakeholders who need to get directly to it can get to it. So if I get a request, I can go get what I need, but I still provide it to the business user. Not quite there yet.
No, that's good. You always need, and trust me, I've spoken to many people. I don't know anybody who is at that particular stage yet.
Yeah, I think that's a misunderstanding too. We all feel like we're struggling and that we're the only ones that have these data problems. That is so not true. Every time I talk to somebody at another organization, we are all struggling with the same kinds of data environments and trying to get to that level of really using our data to benefit the organization, because there's always more you can do with it, I think.
Absolutely. And speaking of organizations, you work for, I think, a very interesting organization in the field of data. Can you tell us a little bit around what your organization does, specifically around the privacy part of it?
Exactly. So we are the IAPP, as you mentioned, the International Association of Privacy Professionals. I've been there not quite 5 years. We are a membership association for privacy professionals. What does that mean? Well, first of all, we are a non-for-profit. We are policy neutral. What we provide we have trainings that we have created that teach people about data privacy regulations. So we have a training product about the GDPR. We also have another training product about CCPA. Then we have a general kind of training product. It's called our CIPP US. And then we have an EU one, but we have localized versions of that. And it's about data privacy and the regulations within that geographical area. And then we have a couple others. There's one for management. There's one for technology. And with each one of these training products, which we offer in a variety of modalities, because everybody learns different. We have various ways that you can do these trainings. There's also a certification exam that goes with it. Now, in order for us to maintain our certification by ANSI, which we're very proud to say that we have consistently been ANSI certified year after year, our training team and our certification team, there is a giant wall between them. We do not train the exam. We train the book of knowledge, and our exams are tough. And I am not shy to say that I have not passed one yet. Of course, I don't have the time to study for it. You do need to study for these exams. And then you become certified, which in some places, let's use the CNIL as an example. In France, our certifications have become the thing that you need if you want to be a data privacy officer in France, right? Which the GDPR requires organizations of a certain size to have data privacy officers. I firmly believe we will have a federal privacy law in the US. I'm not going to predict when that's going to happen, but every year I think we get a little closer. I think we need one. You know, I think we've got 10 states now that have their own data privacy laws, and they're all just slightly different, which puts a burden on business.
Absolutely.
So we're moving in that direction. But honestly, right now, I think that everybody's is so distracted by generative AI and all of the media buzz around that we're not thinking about data anymore. We're thinking about this other thing. And I'm thinking to myself, it starts with the data.
Yeah, absolutely.
Regulating AI is a great idea, but we need to start with the data first.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. And that's also what I've been advocating for many years is AI is nice, but it's, you know, if it's done on garbage data, then your predictions are also going to be
all over the place. And you being, you know, you're based in Europe, you have been operating under the GDPR for much longer, and you understand the ins and outs, and there are a lot of requirements that businesses must meet. What we have discovered at my organization, so we're teaching folks this stuff, but we also have our own internal privacy operations that we must do because we are now above the threshold that we have to meet these obligations, and we do business in Europe. And what has come out of that is a cross-functional team between the data team, myself, and our chief privacy officer and the couple people that are, and we have formed kind of a data privacy operations team. And what we've discovered is that we must work together in order to be privacy compliant, which takes work.
Correct, absolutely. And you must get this question probably a million times a week, but what I find very interesting is you're this global association that exists all over the world.
Yep.
Yet the definition of privacy is so different at different places.
It is.
So the US looks at privacy completely different than Europe.
Completely different, absolutely.
Completely different from parts of Asia. So how do you find common ground around, you know, you're standing for privacy, but that definition is so different.
This is where we come in and be privacy neutral. Our trainings and exams are geared towards the regulation itself, which doesn't take into interpretations about how I as an individual or a business interpret privacy. We don't do that. So we've got a Brazilian privacy exam now.
Because I imagine that you very quickly get into more of like a political debate.
Absolutely, and that's why we remain policy neutral. We have folks in Washington with their ear on the ground to know what's happening because we provide news and resources, free news and resources at our volume of content is off the chart. I would recommend anybody who wants to know more about this, go to our website. It's simple, iapp.org, and there is a plethora of free resources to learn about data privacy, what's going on in your country or your region of the world, etc., and you can get a good introduction. But you hit on a point that when I do talk about federal privacy law in the U.S., that I point out to people all the time, which is in the EU, it was driven from an individualistic consumer perspective. It was you, Jan, coming forward with, I have personal data privacy rights. And it was driven from that perspective, particularly in Germany. However, in the US, that is not the perspective that this discussion is being driven from. It's being driven from a business perspective, not individual people, which will ultimately impact what form this federal privacy law takes, right? Which we try to stay away from, but the law will be different. We will not have a reboot of GDPR. It's going to be something else.
Yeah.
Which
so if and maybe now I'm getting into the philosophical questions, but do we truly actually have privacy in this open online world?
So this This is interesting. I had this conversation with my wife over the weekend. So we talk about this all the time because she feels like she works at my organization because a couple days a week I work from home and she hears my meetings. So we have these conversations all the time because she loves to debate. So we're talking about this this past weekend, and it occurred to me, I was like, we're going to get a data privacy law, but is this privacy law really for my privacy? Because I've already accepted that my data is out there.
Yeah, correct.
It's just out there, right? Because the wild, wild west of data proliferation is not that long ago. And 2010, 11, 12, the rise of Facebook and social media, we were just putting everything out there. We were taking crazy little fun quizzes on Facebook, not realizing that those quizzes were going to segment us into certain types of people to be used for other things, right? We didn't all understand that then. So I personally think our data is out there. It does need to be protected to a certain degree, in terms of banking and credit card companies and other places that do have our data. I believe they have a responsibility to protect our data. But I also think that my data is out there, and if somebody wants it bad enough, they'll be able to get it. That might also be true for my adult son. So for me, and this is my opinion only, I do not speak for my organization in this regard. This is just my opinion. I personally think that we are making laws for our grandchildren and their children to protect their privacy, because I think the horse has left the barn for hours.
Yeah, for a very long time. I fully agree with you there in the sense that it's going to become a bigger and bigger issue the further we get. There are also some states or countries, I should say, in which this privacy is completely non-existent.
That's right.
And you're also going to see some misuse out of that.
Absolutely. Right.
Whereas at the same time, in countries where there is data privacy, then that data privacy typically applies towards the corporates and the larger organizations. But if they really need your data for national security matters or any kind of crime-related part, and they can still get it through courts, obviously, but ultimately there's a way to get it because it exists in the first place. And
correct.
If the data wouldn't be there, then the privacy issue would also not be.
It's kind of like, I hearken it back to with the crash of, in the late 20s when we had the Depression. There were lots of measures put into place to keep that from happening again. The formation of the SEC is a perfect example. The SEC was not going to do anything for the people who had already lost all their money.
Correct.
But it was going to prevent us now from losing all our money in the next financial crisis, right? Which is exactly what it did. It did what it was meant to do. It was not meant to protect at that point, but it was meant to protect future instances. And I kind of see privacy law, at least in this country, being similar, not exactly the same, but kind of a similar thing, that we're not remediating, we're preventing for instances.
Absolutely. I think that's a very beautiful summary. So I'm going to ask you one last philosophical question, and then we're going very fast through the time, so we kind of need to move towards the end. But one last really fundamental philosophical question. I obviously would like to hear your perspective and not necessarily from your organization.
Of course.
Is data privacy a fundamental human right?
I believe it is, yes.
I fully agree as well, because
I do.
It's too easy to think that it's just something that others will do for you.
I agree. I absolutely believe that. And if we want to pull in my history degree, and if we could go back in time and get beyond our founding fathers thinking that we were all witches because we have this technology, if we were to lay it down in a logical way, I think that they would agree with us too.
Absolutely. I think so too. If they would have known that the technology would be able to be there, they might have written it down.
I believe so. I do too.
Good. So one of the questions, because obviously there's a podcast, a lot of people who are listening want to learn something that they would like to use in their jobs, or that they can help propel their career further. If you can give one last piece of advice from all the lessons that you learned over the years, as well as your your day-to-day job within the data privacy domain. There's one fundamental thing that people, for instance, should look up or study or be involved in. What would you recommend?
Well, the first thing I would say is don't be discouraged, because there's a lot out there. I would also say that if you're interested in data, it doesn't matter what you were doing before. It doesn't matter. In my cohort at UNH, we had 3 PhDs in various, chemistry, physics, all kinds of different things. We had people directly out of college. We had all sorts of folks from all different backgrounds. It doesn't matter what background you come from. If this is something that you want to get into, there are a multitude of ways you can do that. And I would say, understand how you learn, and then learn it that way. If you can learn it through online Coursera courses, great. Go do that. If you're like me and you need classroom structure, or you just like school, go do that. But my honest to God, my one piece of information, and this would beyond just data, which is just start, and the rest is easy. Just start.
Well, you're absolutely a living example how you can go from a restaurant business completely towards the domain of data, get a PhD in that, talking about data cultures, and ultimately data privacy. It's quite a journey, and I'm truly impressed.
Well, thank you very much. It has been a journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking about journey, unfortunately, our journey today, at least on this episode, is coming towards an end. I would like to thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your insights. It's such a great pleasure to talk to you. I think we have a lot of similar views and a lot of similar experiences on how we went through this journey. So I would like to truly thank you.
It's been my pleasure.
Like an interview, it's more of a conversation that we're having about things that are, I think, of both our interests. So thanks so much for being part of Big Data Talks with us today.
It's been absolutely my pleasure. As we said at the beginning, I think you and I could talk about this for quite some time. And at some point, I will be visiting Brussels for one of our international conferences, and I may come find you, and we will carry on where we leave off. But thank you very much for inviting me. I always enjoying being part of your activities, and I look forward to presenting again next year at the next conference.
Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure, Susanna.
Thank you. Have a great day.